Hello and welcome back. We will start with module 6 today. Module 6 will focus on diglossia. Diglossia is a particular language contact scenario. Typically, it happens, it is one of the reasons for language contact or more than one language being in the, in the same place and so on. So, this is an interesting phenomenon as far as language use and language and its interaction in society is concerned. So, let us start with the today's topic. So, these are this is how I have broken down the topic of diglossia. So, first we will talk about what it is, how this came about, a little bit of historical aspects, and then we will discuss the features of diglossia following Fishman and Ferguson's research. Then also of course, extended diglossia, another important part of diglossic research, and then some criticisms and future perspectives. We will also be able to include a few case studies, not much for one lecture, but I will add the references anyway, so you can look up. So, we will start with 1959 Charles Ferguson. So, he is credited with to be the person who created this entire domain of research, who first identified the language used in a particular way in certain societies, and then he proceeded to call it a diglossic situation. So, in 1959 Charles Ferguson identified a type of multilingual society, and he was the first person to identify this as a construct. So, the word is derived from, like many other such cases, from Greek. So, going back to the Greek word. So, we have this meaning two, di meaning two, and glossa meaning language. So, basically when there are two languages being used in a particular given social format, in a particular society. So, in a diglossic situation, language or language variety, it can be more than one language or it can be varieties of the same language that fulfills different functional role in a society. So, diglossia is a situation which is not just a simplistic case of bilingual society or a multilingual society. However, but there is a situation where two varieties of one language or two different languages are used for specific functions in that society. So, that is what is called diglossic. So, these varieties are termed high variety and low variety. In literature, they are always written with a capital H or a capital L. So, the high variety is used for all the higher purposes, higher as in official purposes like government, education. It also is used for religious purposes, it has more prestige, and it has a standard written format. So, all of these are typical features of the high variety, and most of the time it also has a rich literary tradition. So, the variety of the language that is, or the language that is spoken there. So, that variety, for any variety, whether it is a variation of the same language or a completely different language, for it to be called high variety, these are the criteria that it should fulfill. One, it should be standardized in a standardized form, it should have a rich cultural heritage, literary heritage, and typically it will be used for all the official, administrative, education, even religious purposes. On the other hand, the low variety or the L variety is used for informal communication. This is like the colloquial version of a language. In any society that you go to, sometimes even in a society where not many languages are spoken, you will see some variety of the language has a lower prestige, that is called the colloquial form, and the same language may have a higher purpose. So, that is also possible. In some cases it is also possible. So, that will be called the low variety. So, it will not have much power, it will not be used for the for any kind of administrative purposes and so on. So, this is like a social usage or marketplace language, and many other such terms have been given. So, this is how this is a much later definition, but this is how he describes it. So, diglossia is a relatively stable language situation in which in addition to the primary dialects of the language, which may include a standard or regional standards, there is a very divergent, highly codified, that is the standard one. Now, often grammatically more complex, superposed variety, the vehicle of a large and respected body of literature, written literature, either of an earlier period or in another speech community, because diglossic situation to come about, often what happens, another language is imposed on the society, on the country, nation, whatever you have. In that case, it will belong to another speech community, but it can be from the same place and people, but it can be from an earlier period, like the classical languages, for example. So, classical languages are often in Indian scenario also, we see classical languages have a higher prestige form because of the history, because of the literature that exists and the highly codified format that it has, and so on. So, that is what he also says. So, which is learnt largely by formal education, high variety is learned by formal education and used for most written and formal purposes, but it is not used by any section of the community for ordinary conversation. That is very important. So, high variety is almost always reserved for the formal purposes. It is not a day to day use language. The low variety on the other hand is the one that is used for day to day function. So, that is how he defined it, Ferguson defined it. Now, examples that he gave were for example, one is from Egypt. So, in Egypt classical Arabic is the high variety and the Egyptian Arabic is the low variety. Now, the Arabic has a number of varieties, each of them different from one another by very on number of variables, but for all of those countries where Arabic is the official language, there are two kinds of Arabic. So, the classical Arabic is the one that in which the all the official works are carried out. The Quran is written in the classical Arabic, but the local version of Arabic in case of Egypt, it is the Egyptian Arabic, in Syria it will be Syrian Arabic, like that. So, those will be the lower variety because they are used by the local people. So, classical Arabic, in this case classical Arabic came from outside. This is from a different place and from a different community altogether. So, that is how it that is what he meant when he said that it is a language either from a different time or from a different place. Another example he gives is that of Haiti. So, French is the higher variety and the lower variety is the Haitian Creole. Similarly, Switzerland has High German as the official language, that is the H variety, and the lower variety is the Swiss German, and there are many other such examples that he gives in his books. Similarly, another example I have here from the Ferguson 2007. So, how are they different? So, for example, this is classical Arabic, this is Egyptian Arabic, and then you can see certain differences in the structure. So, the term for H, term for L, this is how things change. So, for the higher variety, this is the structure, for the lower variety, this is the structure. So, there are differences in terms of, these are examples, these are all textbook examples about how higher and lower variety are different. They can be different on multiple, not only on the usage front, but also on multiple fronts with respect to phonology, morphology, syntax, various other factors. So, these are the terms that they use, term for higher variety and this is the term for the low. So, Amiya is the term for lower variety for Egyptian and similarly for other languages. So, now we will go to the features for all of these various kinds of diglossic situation. Typically, all of these features hold for all diglossic situations, barring a few, there might be a few exceptions here and there, but largely we stick to these features. So, first and foremost, because the higher and lower variety are defined in terms of their functionality in a society. So, we will start with function. So, the first criteria is function. So, the specialized domain of usage of higher and lower variety are what typically is the starting point for defining a diglossic situation. So, as we have already talked about, the high variety will be used for all the higher purposes. So, for example, in this case that we have added some of them. So, sermon in church will be in higher variety, instruction to servant will be in lower variety, personal letter might be in high variety, political speech in high variety, university lecture in high variety. However, radio soap opera will be lower variety and folk literature will be lower variety. Then caption for political cartoons also will be low variety, because you are trying to connect to the masses, the public. So, lower variety will be preferred, because that is the language of everyday conversation for majority of people. Because remember, higher variety is often not a spoken variety, it is restricted to the official usage, it is restricted to formal scenarios, writing and so on, not for communication in day to day life. Prestige is another thing that has been highlighted by Ferguson and others. So, prestige is the H variety has higher prestige, which is natural, because so far we have already seen how attitude and identity, all those factors play a role in the language, the way we look at a language. So, once you have a variety of a language that is used for all the important purposes in a given society, like administration, like education, like religious purposes, then naturally the idea will be that the higher variety has a higher prestige. That is almost a given. So, speakers always regard the H variety as having higher prestige than the L variety. So, it may sometimes lead to regard H as the only variety, only real variety, that also happens in certain cases. For example, again following the same lead. So, Haitian Creole is the local language in which communities of speakers communicate with each other, that is the daily conversation, that is the language in which daily conversation takes place. Often, and French is the official language. So, French automatically has a higher status, as a result of which many educated Haitian Creole speakers do not even acknowledge that there is a variety like the Creole, that they often they claim that they always speak French. Sometimes H may be believed to be more beautiful. It is all the fallout of the function in the society, because H variety is used for higher purposes. Naturally, this also draws from our understanding of attitudes. So, often the higher variety is considered to be more beautiful, more logical, more suited for for expressing thoughts and higher ideas and so on. Sometimes it is connected with religion as well. So, the Haitian Creole speakers are accustomed to a French version of the Bible. So, for Arabic the higher variety is the Quranic Arabic. So, that is how it goes in most societies where you have a diglossic scenario. Literary heritage is another important aspect of diglossic societies. So, literary heritage will be more often than not connected with the higher variety. So, the higher variety will have a generally a large sizable body of written literature that goes back in time, and as a result of which it is always held in high esteem. The very simple fact is, because the very simple fact here is that if you have been, if there is a language that has created adequate amount of literature, it has to be of a higher variety, it has to be something more useful, it has to be of a higher character and so on. So, that is often the case. So, that is how the diglossic situation comes about. A language which has a rich heritage typically will be the higher variety. So, it serves as the standard variety of the language. Often it leads to utilization of words, phrases and constructions that may have been from an older period, because obviously, if you have a period of history behind, you have a literature that goes back in time, and some of those terms that have been used in the old times can also be used now, that is understood. Right. So, this way it can be they continue to be used, because the higher variety draws its structure from the older variety that has always been in use for higher purposes, and it affects readers to appreciate such usage who will not understand them without doing his or her research. So, this is how it has been put forward. Acquisition, again another factor where L variety and H variety differ. Because L variety is used in the colloquial communication in the day to day activities, L variety is often learned socially. This is something for which you do not need a formal training. Children learn to speak in L, is like the L1, often it is the L1, the language that is spoken at home, language that is spoken in the neighborhood and so on. So, it is something that you learn to speak fluently. On the other hand, H variety is often taught in a formal situation. So, with grammatical rules and so on and so forth. So, when it is taught, any language that is taught will be taught with through grammar and through rules and norms, etc. But in the L variety, because it is the mother tongue, it is the first language, it is the language that you will learn socially, those things are not highlighted often. Of course, we all understand that eventually, but that has not been, that typically is not highlighted. So, to achieve the degree of L, H must change the pattern of education. Only when the H variety is learned socially, that is the only time when the speakers can acquire native like very high proficiency. But typically it is not the case, because high variety is not used in the day to day life. So, there is no way the speakers can learn that variety as properly as the L variety. Then the another connected notion is that of standardization. Now, H form has the grammar, dictionary, treatises on pronunciation, style and so on and so forth. By virtue of all these, that variety is called high variety, right. So, it will automatically have these assets. So, orthography will be established, vocabulary will be established, the grammar, the rules, everything. In contrast, the lower form, the same are often non-existent. Often what happens in some societies, it is seen that the lower variety remains restricted to the only in the spoken variety, because it may not even have a script. That is also possible. Not always, but it is also possible. One of the situations where L variety does not have its own script, and of course, not much of literature. So, naturally the standardization takes some time, if at all it does happen. It needs some conducive social scenario and political will and so on and so forth. So, in communities with no single important center of communication, number of regional varieties exist. If you want to standardize the local variety in the lower variety, in that case there has to be one center for communication where standardization process takes care. But a H form always is standardized form, because that by virtue of that only it is the standard, that the higher variety. Then stability. Diglossia is not entirely unstable. In fact, some countries, some places diglossic situation can continue for ages, like years and hundreds of years, thousands of years, is possible. Communicative tension are often resolved in the diglossic situation, resolved by the use of relatively uncodified, unstable, intermediate forms of language and repeated borrowing of vocabulary from higher to the lower variety. There is often there is no tension between the higher and lower variety. This is a given, this is understood, and but also at the same time the situation may be stable, but the difference between the languages may not be entirely stable, in the sense that it is possible to borrow certain words, certain expressions, certain other parts of the higher variety into the lower variety. So, that is often possible. For example, one textbook example is of course that spoken Arabic has a highly classical vocabulary with few or no inflectional endings, features of classical syntax. So, this is also possible. Grammar, higher and lower variety differ heavily on the grammatical features. Higher version, as expected, will have all the, because it is highly codified, it has all the grammatical complexities intact. In the colloquial version of any language, whether it is one language or one variety of a language, colloquial version allows for certain flexibility, that is why it is colloquial. right. So, there are sometimes the grammatical complexities will be reduced. So, some examples again from primarily from Ferguson's work. So, classical Arabic for example, has 3 cases in the noun marked by endings, but not in the colloquial dialects. Similarly, standard German has 4 cases in the noun, Swiss German has only 3. These are some examples that he gives to show that grammatically also there might be variations between the higher and the lower variety. It is possible. Lexicon, bulk of the vocabulary is shared, because ultimately if it is the same language, then of course, the vocabulary will be to a large extent it will be shared. H variety contains technical and learned terms not found in the L variety, because such subjects rarely arise in lower variety. It is understandable, because let us say the variety that is used for administrative purposes will have words that are necessary for administrative purposes, but lower variety is not used for those purposes. So, it will not have those words, but largely general vocabulary might be shared. If it is the same varieties of the same language, then it is possible. Notable feature, many paired lexical items where one is higher and the other is lower, both refer to the common concept, but their use immediately identifies the utterance as a higher or lower variety, because the vocabulary, the primary vocabulary may be same, but then again the usage might differ, because the domains of usage are different. So, you might be still able to identify, right. So, phonology, in terms of phonology, sound systems of H and L varieties in diagnostic form, a diagnostic language form a single integrated phonological system. So, L's phonology acts as the basic system, while H includes divergent features functioning as subsystems or parasystems. So, speakers possess a unified inventory of phonemes. If it is the same language, then the phoneme inventory will be largely same, like lexicon, and used in both varieties, leading to extensive phonological interference in both direction between H and L. Certain phonemes present in pure H form, however, might be absent in the lower form, but if it is the 2 varieties, then largely the phoneme inventory will be same. Extended diglossia was initially proposed by, as we just saw, all of these ideas are come from Ferguson. So, that was the basic idea of diglossia that he gives. So, it was initially proposed to explain societies where different varieties of the same language serve different functions. But in 1963, Fishman added some more aspects to it, and this is what later on were called extended diglossia. So, in the extended diglossia, it includes multilingual societies where different languages, not just varieties, are functionally allocated. So, in case of all of the examples that we saw till now are situations where there are not too many languages. So, it is possible that 2 varieties of the same language are utilized in 2 different functional domains, and Fishman eventually included the possibility where there are 2 languages functioning as one functioning as high variety, other functioning as the low variety. So, thereby he extended the idea. He included the degrees of linguistic difference and the coexistence of multiple varieties. So, that is why it is called extended. More importantly, he stressed the relationship between bilingualism and diglossia, because he brings in the added complexity of having more than one language or more than 2 languages in a given society. So, he was one of the first to highlight the relationship between bilingualism and diglossia, and then eventually Gumpers also added some more notions. For example, he extended the notion of diglossia to include societies using dialects, registers and language varieties beyond separate languages. So, the notion, it started with Ferguson, then it got extended by this Gumpers, as well as it was. So, the extended variety of extended variety included by, when it comes to Fishman, it included different varieties of language, and thereby he stressed the idea of multilingualism, bilingualism, etc., with respect to diglossia. and Gumpers added a few more notions to it. So, there are some examples, for example, 1962 study give an example of the extended type of diglossia in case of Paraguay, for example. So, Paraguay, like many other countries in their neighborhood, they were colonized by the Spanish. So, Spanish was the official language. However, the local indigenous languages also in some places they were able to maintain it. So, in case of Paraguay, though the official language was Spanish, but the local language Guarani was used for communication with local population. So, the colloquial functions, colloquial purposes Guarani was utilized. So, that was a diglossic situation. So, the choice of language depends on the relationship with the interlocutor. How was this carried out? So, depending on who you are talking to, your choice of words, choice of language will depend. So, it is for the solitary relationship, one would use Guarani. If it is appeal to power, they will use Spanish. And Ruby also found out that when there is a status difference, for example, the interlocutor is inferior, the speaker uses Guarani. So, if you are talking to somebody more powerful, you use Spanish. You are talking to somebody who you consider inferior, you use Guarani. Among equals Guarani, but for in case of somebody looking up to the power, then Spanish and so on. So, depending on the various social scenario, the choice of language will differ. Also, the urban rural division, people in the city chose to speak Spanish, while those in the country were more likely to use Guarani. That was how the diglossic situation was explained by this particular study by Ruby. Now, Fishman's fourfold model with respect to bilingualism, because we just said that he brought in the idea of bilingualism and added a layer of understanding with respect to diglossia, and thereby he created a fourfold model. So, there can be 4 possibilities with respect to bilingualism and diglossia. One is bilingualism with diglossia. So, where widespread individual bilingualism is there, social functional distribution of L and H will automatically arise. So, for example, the Paraguay case. So, there is extended bilingualism. So, all the people in the society are able to speak in both L and the H variety. In such a case, the society is bilingual and they also have a diglossic scenario, because the usage of those 2 languages are different. Similarly, you can also have bilingualism without diglossia. So, society when it is a bilingual society, it need not be that one language gets preference for one particular function, that is also possible. So, many bilingual individuals, but strict functional differentiation may not exist. So, it is possible to use both the languages for all kinds of purposes. And then diglossia without bilingualism is also possible. So, we have seen bilingualism with diglossia, bilingualism without diglossia. Now, we are talking about diglossia without bilingualism. So, 2 groups within one society speak distinct languages. So, there is no bilingualism in the society. There are the higher class speaks one language, the masses speak another language, the elites speak one language, the public speaks another language. So, in such a case, whatever language the elite speaks in will be the language for all the higher purposes, that is a given. But because these are 2 different communities of people, 2 different groups of people, there is not much of intermingling. So, the elite does not speak the language of the masses of course do not have access to the language of the elites. So, the society is not bilingual. This kind of a scenario is in today's world, it is rare, but it did exist in the pre-First World War Europe, where the elites had exclusive access to the high variety and the lower variety was used by the masses. Now, the fourth possibility is neither bilingualism nor diglossia, that is also possible, but again it is even more rare, because in today's world almost everywhere you see more than one language, or in any big community languages will tend to diverge, they will have varieties. So, no bilingualism, no diglossia is possible only in case of very small and isolated communities where only one variety of a language is used. It has to be a very small community, otherwise if it is a big community, languages will have more variations. There are some studies in India as well. So, we have included one case study from a 1980 study, where they looked at the use of mother tongue and English diagnostic situation in among the educated bilingual Indians. So, the study was situated in Hyderabad and Secunderabad. Mother tongue, they were looking at the subjects mother tongue usage and the use of English depending on the different kinds of social scenario, different kinds of domains and which language is used where. So, this was 39 situations were presented to the subjects in order to understand how the differentiation of the usage of the two languages worked. So, in family domain typically they found not only that in the family domain you use the mother tongue more, but they even found, it was a very interesting study, they found a nuanced usage of mother tongue even within the family situation. So, English is spoken so with children, but with English maximally with children, minimally with their mothers, and on the other hand the local variety was the mother tongue was used with mothers more and less with the children. Very interesting findings. Friendship domain, English is dominant. In written communication, the subjects used English almost exclusively. Neighborhood, no language was clearly dominant, because this would depend on the interlocutor with whom you were talking. So, there they found that in context where people do not share the same mother tongue, naturally English or Hindi will be preferred, but if they share, then mother tongue might be preferred. Domains of government, English again is dominant, because English is in Indian scenario, English as the higher variety is almost a given in any part of the country. So, English will be used for the domains of government, but in some cases because the state official language can also be used for official purposes. So, there might be some kind of nuances depending on certain places. So, what they found was English was more dominant in their case. In oral communication, some use mother tongue, in writing English is the only language used. Other domains also they have looked at, English is dominant in areas where ordering in restaurants, talking to doctors, bargaining at shops and so on and so forth. Indian linguistic scenario is quite interesting, because you signal, like we have seen already with attitudes, language use signals your identity, signals a lot of things including power. So, we will discuss power and solidarity in another lecture, in a different lecture. So, there have been some criticisms as well of the idea of diglossia. For example, this particular 2017 paper talks about the serious the strict compartmentalization of the higher and lower variety, and that something may not always work in the real life. Real life scenarios are a lot more fluid. So, that has to be taken into account. That is one comment that is one idea that has been put forward. Then also that the agnostic and apolitical character of the language variety, because the division of labor between high and low varieties as matter of fact is also not something that the authors readily agreed with. According to them, these are actually matters of concern, because here comes the the division of between different classes and the idea of the social struggle and the power relation and so on and so forth. So, it is not a very simple straightforward idea as the researchers before have talked about. According to Jaspers, this should be a matter of concern rather than a matter of fact. So, based on these ideas, there has been some future perspectives that have been proposed in the literature. Scholars have suggested various ideas that can be looked at. For example, transglossia that goes beyond heteroglossia refers to the fluid language practices that question traditional descriptions based on national myths that they have said, because in today's world the language use is so fluid, even you cannot really strictly except some cases of course, but other than that most of the time people are especially in multilingual societies, the language use is very fluid. So, it is not very easy to compartmentalize them strictly. So, majority of the concerns and the future perspectives that have been proposed come from that perspective, from that angle only. So, critical diglossia as a concept has also been proposed, and some more ideas like this. And then beyond taxonomy has been suggested by Jesper. So, they suggest that instead of multiplying diglossias as many others have proposed, he has talked about enregisterment by Aga, for example. He refers to many other studies. So, they have talked about rather than looking at more types of diglossia, let us add some more new concept that they call enregisterment. These concepts focus on how linguistic forms become socially typified. Rather than looking at how many different kinds of varieties might be there with respect to their functions, let us look at how it came about in the first place. That is where diversion has been made, new ideas have been proposed. They also help to explain the development and instability of semiotic divisions. So, registers they actually become registers, stylized varieties of a language. So, the registers can grow or decline depending on the social recognition. So, basically the various varieties exist because the social causes are there. So, that is what we should be actually studying, that is what has been proposed. So, this is all about diglossia. We end lecture 1 here. In the next lecture, we will take up another issue with respect to language contact scenario. Thank you.